What's up, gang? Welcome to The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now listen, The Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius, and boy, do we have a special guest. Jack Carr is in the house. What's up, Jack?
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, I'm so fired up to have you here on the show. Jack, do you mind if I do a little bit of housekeeping and then we're going to rock and roll and get into the show?
Please do.
So, guys, Jack Carr here is a freaking royal badass. I was so pumped to get him on. Our team went out there. We're always looking for like the best of the best. And I stumbled upon Jack's work. He's got a really dynamic background. I'm going to save it for the bio. But the team went out. We so gracious to come on, spend some time with us here on the show. But before we get into it, what I'm going to do is we love origin stories. Before we go into the origin story, what I'd love to do is give you guys a little bit of background on Jack. So Jack is a former Navy SEAL. He's a #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Terminal List book series. And that book series has actually been converted into a blockbuster TV series right now that's on Amazon Prime, starring Chris Pratt. And he's also the host of the Terminal List podcast series. So, man, Jack, welcome to the show, my friend. Pumped to have you here.
Having me on. This is great.
Oh, man. So pumped. So, guys, before the show, we were offline. I was giving him a little bit of background on like kind of where this came from. I know listeners know I talk about all sorts of stuff all the time, but I've talked in the past about TEDx and how this show is kind of born out of the TEDx event we did in San Francisco in 2012 and 13. And I was telling Jack, I'm like, man, like you're kind of the definition of what that was about that actually spawned the birth of the show, which is, people that have done really extraordinary things. One of which was you are a former Navy SEAL. And we've had a few really interesting Navy SEALs on the show in the past. We got a couple more coming up. I just love it because I think it's just such a hard thing to do. And it has such lore here in the US and probably around the world as just being an incredibly difficult thing and produces an elite person that maybe it's an elite person that goes into it that becomes the Navy SEAL. But would love to hear, how did you become the Navy SEAL that you became before you took on the second act of becoming a creative in your life? Would love to hear some of the origin story. What got you to where you got to?
Yeah, well, it starts very early for me in that I think it was just in my blood. Military service was in my blood. I grew up with my grandfather's medals from World War II. He was killed off Okinawa in 1945. He was a Marine Corsair pilot. And I had black and white photos of him and his squadron and the silk maps that they used to give aviators back then. Because if you hit the water with a paper map, then it would just disintegrate. The silk maps would just get wet and you could use them. So I had all that stuff of his, had his wings. So I knew I was destined for military service. And my dad and I were watching a show back then. Some people might remember it. Maybe these listeners or viewers might be a little too young, but late 70s, there was a show. I caught it in the early 80s on syndication with Robert Conrad playing Pappy Boynton, who was a Marine Corsair pilot in the Pacific in World War II. So I was watching that with my dad, and that was kind of our connection to that generation, because this is back obviously before social media and ways that you can easily track down somebody. So a lot of my dad's connection and mine to that generation was through really popular culture, through movies and TV shows and books. So I was heading into the military one way or another. And then I found out about SEALs at the ripe old age of 7. And I found out about SEALs through a TV show or a movie called The Frogman, old black and white film. And my mom was a librarian. So we went down to the local library and started researching what Frogman was, found out about Navy SEALs. There was a little bit written about them back then. This is the early 80s. And most of the things that were written about SEALs back then were about what SEALs did in Vietnam. And so for my generation in the 80s, almost every action hero on TV had a background in Vietnam. A lot of the protagonists in movies also backgrounds in Vietnam. Same thing in books. So I found out about what SEALs were, and my 2 takeaways from that research with my mom were that SEALs are some of the most elite special operators in the world, and the training is some of the toughest ever devised by the modern military. So from age 7 onward, that's where I was headed, to BUDS, SEAL training, and into the SEAL team. So I just kept my eye on that goal really my whole life. But with my mom as a librarian, I was reading. So I was reading everything nonfiction I could find on special operations, on warfare, on insurgencies, counterinsurgencies, terrorism. I was reading anything that I could find also in the thriller space. So when I got to about fifth grade, I started reading the books my parents were reading, sixth grade for sure. And I started reading all what are now classics by the masters. So people like Tom Clancy and Nelson DeMille and A.J. Quinnell and J.C. Pollock and Mark Olden, David Morrell, who created Rambo back in 1972 with First Blood. And so I'm reading all of these thrillers that are essentially giving me my education in the art of storytelling. So I started building my foundation to both be a SEAL and an author very early in life.
What so it's so funny. I'm 46 years old, so we may have grown up around the same time. Like as you're saying that, I'm like, oh yeah, like A-Team. Those were a bunch of guys that were like part. You know, they were Vietnam vets.
Simon and Simon, Miami Vice, even the Fall Guy, Airwolf. Like there was all these shows that had Vietnam connections back then.
Yeah, it's so funny. And then what was the TV show that you and your father watched? Did you say?
Black Sheep Squadron.
Oh, interesting. I'm not aware of that. But so when you were, so that's interesting. Your mom, so you got like the writing side. My mom was a bookworm, and she's like, she was a social worker, but she was always like, oh, I should have been a librarian. And so I think that, so did you feel like you had the book thing in your blood with your mom being a librarian?
Oh yeah, I grew up surrounded by books and a love of reading. Can't remember a time ever in my life where didn't have a book and know exactly what book I was going to read after that. So reading's been a part of my life forever.
Do you, and I could obviously see behind you, anyone who's watching the show visually, you'll see that Jack has a lot of books behind him. And so are you more of a read book or audiobook, or do you do both?
I need to read them. I just grew up reading them, and so that's my thing. Audiobooks are the fastest growing segment of publishing, and I have an amazing narrator, Ray Porter, who reads mine. And I didn't know at the time. It was probably maybe 2 months or so before the first book came out, maybe 3, something like that. And Simon & Schuster reaches out, and they gave me a kind of a sample reading of someone they thought would be a good narrator. And I listened to it, and I was like, oh, this isn't going to work. And I asked them, hey, I haven't sold one book yet or anything, no background in from sports or politics or anything that's going to give me any sort of a platform or following that's going to sell books. And I didn't know the audio side of the house. And what I didn't know is that people follow narrators from project to project.
Oh, no way.
Simon & Schuster, if I could shoe somebody else, and they said, yeah, just let us know by the end of the day. And it was like, already past noon, I think. And so I start Googling, or I start using the Audible sample thing. And so I just start listening to those samples, those 1 minute samples or 30 seconds, whatever they are. And I found this guy, Ray Porter. I thought, ooh, this guy's pretty good. And I listened to a few more of his, and I said, oh, this guy's amazing. And I had no idea that he is like the top narrator in the world, essentially. I had no clue. And I asked Simon & Schuster if we could have him narrate. And they said, well, we can ask him. And they reached out, asked him. He said yes. And now we're dear friends. So, but for me, I need to read them. I need the hardcover, or paperback or trade paperback. But I have to have the physical book just because that's how I grew up.
I love that. Yeah, it's funny. So I wrote a book, and I have an audiobook for it, which is a nonfiction business book. But I was a person that couldn't listen to books at all. And so, but I was very curious about how the process works. So I went and found a company that did it. And I went through a hybrid publisher, but I ended up, they gave me a list of like 400 actors. One of which, there was a TV show in the 80s called Perfect Strangers with Balki Baltakamis.
He's a narrator just the other day on something.
Yeah, he was one of the narrators. I was like, I can't remember, his name's like something Bishant or something is the last name. But anyway, I was like, Balki Baltakamis? I'm like, it wasn't the right voice, but I had a Juilliard trained actor. He was amazing. I mean, I went through 400 different voices. So that's cool that I didn't realize. And maybe that's more on, I wonder if they do that for nonfiction. For fiction, that makes sense though, right? Like that you would have like a narrator that people want to go listen to because they're storytelling and they have the inflection of their voice. One of the things that I love about listening to books is, like Matthew McConaughey did the book Green Lights, right? And I always tell people, I'm like, you can't go wrong if the narrator is someone that won an Oscar. Like more than likely, like they'll do, like Will Smith, like for better or for worse, he does a pretty good job narrating his own book, So that's cool.
out there that also do narration, and it's interesting because you are acting, and
Totally.
you can really tell. But I had to read the forward. I did a new forward to the Terminal List. That's my first book when the show came out, and so we did another hardcover that had pictures from the set, and then I did a new forward that talked about how the show came to be, how the book came to be, how the show came to be, and I read that. And that was so difficult. It was my own words. I had written it like the day before, so I was very familiar with it. I'm not doing any accents, not doing any female voices. I'm just essentially reading the story that is just a part of me. And it was so difficult. Like I have
Yeah.
such a hard time doing that. So I have all the respect in the world for people who can read their own books, and especially those narrators who are acting and are doing all these different accents. Because in my books, there's Russian accents, and there's different Middle Eastern accents, and there's Rhodesian accents, and there's all sorts of accents. So now when I'm writing, I know how Ray Porter does the narration, and he'll do a little skim first. But if he's familiar with the characters like he is with my books now, because there's 7 of them, then I try to write before, like as I introduce a character, that they have an accent. I don't wait till down the bottom of the page and talk about how strong the accent was, so he has to go back and do it again. So I do think about Ray and trying to make his job as efficient as possible as I'm writing or introducing new characters.
I love that. It's like Pierre in his French accent says.
Yeah.
So going back to the Navy SEAL thing. So growing up, where'd you grow up? Did you grow up? I know you said you're in Park City. Did you grow up in Utah, or whereabouts did you grow up?
In California, and then I went to boot camp in '96, and so got to Buds in January of '97. Got to my first SEAL team in October of '97. But yeah, the Hell Week is the thing that most people associate with SEAL training, and I think that's part of the allure, part of the draw is that you're going into something that's touted anyway as some of the toughest training in the world, and that the attrition rate's going to be about 80%. And so that's the draw for a lot of people. It certainly was for me. And I think there's something in all of us that makes us want to test ourselves. And it used to be something that you had to do, meaning to show that you could add value to a tribe, to a community. And you used to have to go through some sort of a crucible, some sort of a test before you were allowed to become part of that tribe. And we've kind of lost that over time. But I think there's still something in our DNA because it was such a part of cultures all around the world. And they're still in there. So that's why I think Marine Corps boot camp is such a draw for people. That's something that most people think about when they think of a crucible and putting themselves through something extremely tough. But it could be any boot camp in any of the services, or SEAL training, or Army Q course for Army Special Forces, or Ranger School, or whatever it might be. But I think there's this draw in all of us, and it's a calling. For me, it certainly was a calling. The military was a calling, and writing was a calling, and I just happened to listen to that. And I think today there's so many distractions that sometimes it's hard to listen to that call. And I think that's why a lot of people later in life look back and have these regrets, because maybe they felt a certain calling, but either society or friends or family or distractions or whatever else, all the options that are available to people today kind of drowned that out, and they didn't listen to it. So for me, I just happened to listen to that voice, listen to that calling, and go all in on both of them. But yeah, SEAL training was it's kind of like what you'd expect. It's you're cold, wet, tired, and hungry, particularly for that Hell Week. And but I love being there because I kept thinking, how lucky am I that I get to listen to this calling, hear this calling so early in life, listen to it, and I'm on this path. And now I live in a country that gives me all these opportunities and gives me the opportunity to be here on this beach in Southern California, testing myself in this crucible called Buds SEAL training. And while I was out there seeing scores of people quitting, and so what happens is there's this bell. People on your show might have talked about it before. So they make it very self-select out of this thing. You ring this bell 3 times, put your helmet down, and then you're out. And usually that's in front of the first phase office for all of training. But during Hell Week, they put it into a trailer hitch. And so it's on a truck, the back of a truck that's within eyesight of you all week. It goes with you everywhere you go. There's this truck. And so anytime you want, you can be warm again, you can have food again, you can have coffee, hot chocolate, whatever, and be out of this misery. So we make it very easy to self-select out. But as people were quitting in droves, I thought about all the people who sacrificed so much from the inception of this country up until today to give me this opportunity to be here on the beach doing these push-ups and getting yelled at and doing these swims and being cold, wet, tired, hungry, and going through this crucible. And I thought of people storming the beaches at Normandy, Iwo Jima. And I thought, you know what, I can do a few more push-ups here. This is nothing relative to what those guys sacrificed so that I could be here and I could choose this path. I had the freedom to choose this path. So I thought about that, put it in relative terms. And even though it's miserable, it's certainly nothing like what was sacrificed. So I could be
I
there.
love that, man. Did you say Northern or Southern California is where you grew up? What part of Northern California?
I just keep it to Northern because it's so easy to find people these days.
Oh, sorry, man. I grew up in Southern California. I lived in San Francisco, so more curiosity than anything else. So you grew up in Northern California. Was your father military, or what was just your grandfather?
Other military history that goes back to the early days of this country that my mom's still researching, actually, and so putting all the pieces together that go back to the Revolutionary War. So there's a
Wow.
lot there. But my grandfather was probably the single largest influence on me, even though he wasn't physically present. But just the idea of him kind of as my hero, I think really kind of spurred me down my path.
That's cool. And I'm a person that kind of follow the. I have the ear for the calling stuff too, right? Where I'm called and I will like not ignore the calling. And I think to your point, there's a lot of distraction, so much distraction. I think you have to like quiet the mind and see see the clues as they're presented in front of us. I think that's so cool that you were such a young age when that was something that became clear to you. Did you like when you were growing up, did you play sports or anything that to prepare? Were you like, okay, well, I know I'm going to be a Navy SEAL, so I got to like be a really good swimmer, or like was there stuff that you did in preparation for that pre joining the military?
Yep, I did swim team, and then right before I came, like as a kid, I was like average, I would say. But I always thought about all the sports that I did in terms of what I was going to do in the future. So whether I was playing soccer, lacrosse, cross country, I think cross country actually played a big role. I can't remember if I've talked about this before, but because when you're training by yourself and there's no one around, it's very easy to walk, especially where I grew up, kind of the mountains. So you're running hills, you're running trails, you're running mountains. It's steep, and for people who run hills, it's a test. It's tough. So as a kid, if there's no one around, it's very easy to walk, and I never did because I thought about what I was going to do later in life. So it always pushed me forward. So I think that really helped, and I did think about that on the beach in Coronado, California, when I was going through SEAL training. I thought of those times running hills, even in grade school, and how hard that was, and how I never quit on those hills because I was thinking about being here in this position right now, running in the sand in Coronado, California. So, so I think all those things did certainly help. And then I think this is why popular culture is so important, especially for kids, because all those movies I saw back then, all the Rocky montages, all
Yeah.
scenes and anything from Predator making the bow, putting on whatever Commando, all those things, Rambo First Blood Part 2, like all of those things really did help, because you're looking as a kid, you're looking up to those guys, even though they're fictional characters on a screen, but doing work outside of, let's say, soccer or cross country or lacrosse or whatever, and doing pull-ups, and even back before anyone had heard of a CrossFit, like changing my grip because I saw what people were doing in this obstacle course and these videos that I saw in Betamax, I think, that I ordered from the back of Soldier of Fortune magazine back in the day to show a little bit of SEAL training. So I was starting to do those things, climbing ropes in trees in the backyard, that sort of thing, shooting my bow from the roof, climbing up on the roof and shooting my bow at angles down at the target instead of having it just be a static, straight kind of range. So I was doing all those things in preparation for what I was going to do later in life. So pretty much, yeah, everything that I did, I thought about it in terms of what would happen later. And I was very fortunate that we're a very outside focused family, so I got to spend a lot of time outdoors, which was fantastic too. But I also always had a book, and all of those things really built this foundation.
What did your parents think about the fact that you're like, yeah, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL? Were they like, cool?
I think they thought I'd grow out of it. Kind of like when you're a kid and you say you're going to be an astronaut, and your parents are like, "Oh yeah, you can do anything you want to do." I think they thought that I would eventually grow out of it and come to my senses, and I never did.
And so when did you say you enrolled in the Marines initially?
No, right in the Navy.
So you went in the Navy, and then how long did it take before you were able to? You have to get invited to Buds, right? Or can you actually just enroll?
No, it's like you. What I didn't know ahead of time is that you can just try out in boot camp. But I signed up for this thing called the Dive Farer program. I did my research ahead of time. I think I knew more than the recruiter about how to get into the SEAL teams. So I did this thing called the Dive Farer program, where you sign on for 6 years, and as signing on for 6 years instead of like the normal 3 or 4 or whatever it was, then you're guaranteed a chance to try out for Buds in boot camp, and that's all I wanted. I just wanted the opportunity to try out. And what I didn't know is that everybody, at least in my boot camp, in my era, got to try out. I guess maybe some people might not have if they got in trouble or if their direct drill instructor person didn't like them or something like that. I don't know. But everybody that I knew that was in at my time, they got the opportunity to try out at boot camp. So did that and passed everything. And then back then you had to go to what's called an A school. So like for other, it's like an MOS, military occupational specialty. And now you don't. Now you're in the pipeline and you go to a little more training that's SEAL specific after boot camp. I think it's still this way anyway. My information is now dated, but
Right.
get to the SEAL teams, and they thought that would make more people get through, and it actually didn't. The attrition rate stayed the same. So we call them fitter quitters because now they're just in great shape when they quit.
Oh.
For me, I went to intelligence school in Dam Neck, Virginia, and then right to Buds. So it was pretty short from time of enlistment to getting to Buds.
Did you make it through Buds the first time?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, I got rolled back one class after Hell Week, and then for shin splints or something, and then just finished with that next class. So yeah, it was fairly
What
straight.
What does that mean? Does that mean you have to do Hell Week twice, or that you did not have
No,
to do Hell Week?
if you get hurt or something before Hell Week, then obviously you start over. But if after Hell Week you've already been through it, then you just pick up right then.
So you joined the military in '96, which means you were a SEAL like right around 9/11. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was on my second deployment. 2 weeks into my second deployment, we're in Guam, and about midnight there, I think. And phones start ringing up and down the hallways. We didn't have TVs in our rooms back then, so we start hearing the news from family members, and people are banging on the doors in this barracks. And we go down to the basement, and where we have a big screen TV, and we watch the Twin Towers fall on TV. And a couple weeks later, we were on planes to the Middle East. We thought we were going to go right into Afghanistan, but we ended up going to Kuwait instead and doing the shipboarding operations that Team 3 was doing before us, and then they went into Afghanistan. But then I ended up in Afghanistan a couple of years later, 2003.
How long were you in the Navy for total?
20 years, 20 and a wake up.
Wow. And were you I know that a lot of this stuff you're not allowed to talk about. So whatever and I'm sure you get asked a lot of these questions, but so like, where did you spend most of your time were you in the Middle East a lot? Were you like, can you share that information?
Yeah, mostly in Iraq. For me, very little of what I did, if anything, was secret. It's all what every big city SWAT team is going to do tonight. They're going to go and serve a warrant, and they're going to have built up a pattern of life on someone, and they're going to have either someone who tells them that so and so is at this location, and maybe they're going to use some technical intelligence to corroborate that, and then they're going to go kick in his door and pull him out, throw him in jail, and question him, and then go out again and go after somebody else if it's part of some sort of a crime syndicate. So pretty much the same thing, except it's in places in Iraq and Afghanistan, and you have an AC-130 gunship overhead and a UAV overhead, and you have other aircraft, and you have QRF, and you have maybe a little more firepower, a lot more firepower. But essentially, it's the same thing. So yeah, so it's nothing crazy secret. Maybe some guys. Mine wasn't too secret. Mine was pretty kinetic. You go and kick a door in the middle of the night, you grab somebody, you drag them back to base, question them, turn them over for somebody else for questioning, and then go out and do it again. So it's pretty, nothing too crazy.
Yeah, we had it's a former guest on the show. He's been on twice. He was Delta Force, Clay Martin. He wrote the book Concrete Jungle. I don't know if you know him or not, but he's a friend, and he like couldn't tell me anything. That was all we talked about. One of the things that you said that I thought was interesting, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, was we started talking about firefights. And he said, when you're at your first firefight, at least his experience was, you kind of have a lot more ammo, and and you're carrying a lot more stuff because you haven't been in war. And he's like, once you get used to it, you're like, oh, that you're basically carrying the minimum because you want room for your snacks. So, which I thought was hilarious. I was like, oh man, like look at that newbie over there. He's got like way more ammo than he needs. Like, did you have a similar experience like that? How was it for you when you first like experienced like firefights versus as you got? Did you ever get used to it?
Yeah, I wasn't making room for snacks though, but the difference between my first deployments or some photos early on in deployments and then the later ones, meaning the early ones, definitely a lot more bulky gear. And then by the end, it was all about slimming down and cutting weight so that you can move either in and out of vehicles, in and out of helicopters, up and over walls, through windows, with as much agility as you possibly can, because your enemy's running around essentially with just a small chest rig with an AK, maybe an RPG. And then you are weighted down with body armor, with an emitter radio. When you get to be in a leadership position, you have two emitter radios on you, one for talk to your team and one to talk to a higher headquarters. You have all your magazines, you have your med stuff, you have your water, you have your helmet with your nods on it. You have all of these things, grenade, pistol, like all of these things that all weigh something and all catch when you're trying to go over a wall or even get in and out of a vehicle. And some of these vehicles that are a little, you're just kind of smushed in there, especially if you have a larger weapon or you have a big radio or something like that. So you can definitely tell the difference between some of my earlier photos and the later photos. People go check that out on my Instagram. I post some Throwback Thursday photos every now and again. Sometimes I point out the gear. People are interested in the gear and what you were wearing at certain points in the war. So, but yeah, slimming down was definitely advantageous later on.
Yeah, that makes sense. What are your thoughts on like you got guys like David Goggins out there and a bunch of other folks who are they talk a lot about the SEALs. I mean, obviously it's such a gnarly thing, and to your point, there's an allure to doing hard things. We had former guest on the show, Michael Easter. I don't know if you know him. He wrote the book Comfort Crisis.
Yeah, one of my podcasts. Great guy.
Great guy, right? So kind of going back to I read his book. I'm excited to read some of your books. But I read Comfort Crisis, and he was on the show, and we really went down this rabbit hole around the fact that we've only had modern comforts for like 100 years, 150 years, but we've been on the planet for 5 billion years or whatever that number is. So it's like humans are not used to being comfortable, like biologically, right? From a evolutionary standpoint, if you believe in that, like, yeah, like we've been sleeping on dirt a lot longer than we've been having, 99.99% of the time. I think that there is that is probably what drives us to do hard things, is just like we're kind of built to do it. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I mean it's what is it? The hot showers, when the first hot showers became a thing, wasn't that long ago, especially in the grand scheme. So we definitely live at a time when we have more creature comforts than any other time in human history, and also more distractions, and certainly a different problem set, especially for kids growing up in this environment. So yeah, I mean, hard things it's important to face a little adversity so that when you actually face real adversity, it's not the first time. So yeah, otherwise you're going to be in for quite the surprise.
Yeah, one of my favorite books I read was Grit, Angela Duckworth's book, and they talk about Beast a lot in that book. The what is it, the West Point program, and they studied these candidates of Beast. And my perspective on this is, obviously you had a lot of resilience. Sounds like you had it at a really young age. I lived in the hills, and I was a wrestler, so in college and in high school, and so we'd have to run, just like to get in shape a lot. And I was always running hills, and it was funny when you were saying that. I'm like, oh, I used to do that. Like I ran up, like I lived in a really hilly part of Southern California, and I remember I hated running the hills, but I was like, well, I can't walk because then I'm not getting in shape, right? So did you always just have that inner resilience? Was it something your parents pushed on you? Was it something that came from within, or combination thereof? Tell me about that.
Yeah, it was just within. I certainly didn't feel. Maybe my parents did something. Maybe they did some Jedi mind tricking, but not that I'm really aware of. I think it was just me. Like if there was a very cold river, creek, stream, I wanted to go in and go under and just feel that cold and try to swim upstream, and that sort of thing. and just kind of envision what it might be like to do a stream crossing or a river crossing with a group, with a team later in life, type of a deal. So I don't know. I just wanted to push myself, and I think that's in a lot of us. But it was innate, as far as I know. But now that you mention it, I'll ask my parents later tonight.
Did you when you were in buds, or when you were in the SEALs, was that a trait you noticed? Like, was that just kind of everyone that was like, because I've heard this, I've spent time personally with people, friends of friends who are SEALs, and I talked about this with them. And they're like, a friend of a friend was telling me when I sat with him for like 4 hours when he was telling me about buds when I was like 22, down in San Diego actually, and he's telling me like, yeah, man, we have Olympians ringing the bell. Like, these are like badass, super athletic, like the most best athletes in the world who are trying to get through buds, and they're it's not about physical, it's about mental toughness. I mean, physically, obviously there's a physical baseline that if you have to have in order to get through it, but he's like 90% of it's mental, 99% maybe is mental. It's do you quit or not? Like, what did you see with the people that made it and didn't make it? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, no, it is all mental. Any average high school athlete can make it through physically, no doubt about it. You can show up out of shape, and don't recommend it, but you can get in shape pretty dang quick during the first couple of weeks leading into Hell Week. So it's certainly not a physical thing. And you're right, we had all sorts of people in amazing shape. I remember one of the people that stands out was huge. He was like this like specimen. And I was like, oh, geez, I get to be like that big and that strong to, get through this program. Holy mackerel. And I mean, he was crushing the O course and the rope climbs and the runs and all this stuff. I was like, oh, goodness. And then and was big, very loud also. And trying to, motivate the class and all that stuff, and quit in the first hour of Hell Week.
Wow.
So, for me, I thought, this program is working. So I liked it when people quit, because it showed me that the program was working as designed. And a lot of people would, say, come back. If someone got out of the surf zone to go quit and ring the bell, like, don't quit, you can make it. And I was always like, nope, that person shouldn't be here. That's the program working. So yeah, it's a crucible. And so, yeah, it's all about finding that person that has that not just the mental fortitude, but we made up a word for it. Actually, they tried to identify the different attributes of someone that would be a good buds candidate, and a good team guy. And one of the words they came up with was team ability. So that's another part of it. You test for that other ways, not really through Hell Week, but through other things that the instructors are observing and your peers are observing. But mental courage, physical courage, team ability, resiliency. I think there's one other that's not coming to mind right now. But yeah, it's really, it's a test. That's pretty good.
That's cool. We had a former guest, Larry Yatch, who wrote a book, How Leadership Actually Works. He's a former SEAL. But he talked a lot about that in his book. So it's interesting. I haven't heard that word in a while. What was your job? Like, what was your official job in SEALs?
So I got to the team, and they sent me to comm school. So big green radios, smaller radio, like all that stuff, VHF, UHF, SATCOM, all that sort of thing, encryption, all of that, how to deal with all those sorts of things, which was actually cool because it got me. And I didn't want to be a comms guy. I wanted to be a point man. Everybody wants to be a point man. But
what's a point man?
It's the person that kind of leads the patrol, and then the team leader or the platoon commander is typically behind that person in the line of march. But I got to be part of all the planning process for everything, because as the comm guy, you need a communications person. So I got to be part of the mission planning process. And this is before September 11th. So everything was really based on Vietnam tactics and whatever had evolved since then through different flashpoints, like let's say a Desert One for Delta, or a Grenada, or a Panama, or a Mogadishu, or a first Gulf War. So you're taking all those lessons learned from what were essentially flashpoints, because we weren't in sustained combat operations really since the end of Vietnam until right after September 11th, 2001. So being a comm guy was actually good, because I got to be part of all of that and got to learn that. And then when I became an officer, it meant that I didn't have to rely on the comm guy to fix my radio, to come over and program my radio, or I didn't have to ask questions like, how are we going to make comms from here or there? Because I knew. and I
Yeah.
could pass some of my lessons to the comm guy actually. So it ended up being a really good school to go to, and then position to have in the team. But then I went to sniper school and free fall school and all that stuff. So I was a sniper early on, and yeah. So everybody has their thing, and most everybody can do everybody else's job as well. Maybe not as good as the main person, but you're going to cross training on everything.
What was if you had to pick the coolest thing or the best moment or just something that just stood out where you're like out of the 20, you said 20-year career, is that correct?
Yeah.
Was there any like moment or a thing you learned or just something that a takeaway where you're like, that's the best thing I got from doing that or the coolest thing I did or the number one moment? Is there anything that's just like the pinnacle for you?
Jeez, I don't know. I mean, just being able to do the job. I didn't really think of it in those terms. It was all about doing the job and continual improvement and spending every single second I possibly could spend to make myself a better leader, a better operator. So when I'm on leave, I'm still going to shooting schools or I'm still reading about Iraq or Afghanistan. The pendulum is on the side of the team. It has to be because you're responsible for those guys. You're taking them down range. You owe it to them, to their families, to the team, to the country, to the mission, to be as prepared as you possibly can be. So, yeah, I think there's just there's not one singular moment that comes to mind. It's a marathon and continually improving, always learning, not just from your mistakes, but other people's mistakes, lessons learned, applying them, thinking about how the enemy's adapting to you, how you can adapt faster than the enemy. So you're thinking about all these things, how to capitalize on momentum, how to identify gaps in the enemy's defenses. So you're doing that constantly on the battlefield. So I guess it was just constant improvement, hopefully.
That's great. And so 2016, it sounds like, is that when you got out? Was it 2016 or 2017?
Yep.
And you're like, all right, man, I'm gonna go write books. Like, like what was that like no questions asked? Like, hey, I know what I'm doing. Were you already writing books when you were in SEAL team? Like, would love to hear how you transition. How'd you pivot? I mean, such a crazy pivot. Obviously, you had the calling of the books that started at childhood as well. But I would love to hear how that worked for you.
Yeah, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, so that was helpful. And I got back from my last Iraq deployment and looked around and said, "Oh, okay. I know I'm going to get out now because as a task unit commander, that'll be the last time that I tactically maneuver guys on the battlefield. And now, if I stay in, I'm going to a staff job, and then I'm going to come back eventually as like an XO and then a CO at some point, commanding officer. But
Yep.
in today's military, really, a commanding officer is more of a manager and is back in the tactical operations center. They're not out there kicking indoors with the guys doing the job, and the guys don't want you out there because you've been in staff jobs for the last 6 years or whatever. So I knew my what I was good at. I knew what I was good at. As Clint Eastwood once said in a Dirty Harry movie, it's important to know your limitations. So the admin staff job was definitely not my future. So I very clear that it was time to get out. My family needed me. We have a middle child with really severe special needs who needs 24/7 full-time care for life. So my mission was changing. And I went to Buds as now the operations officer. And as the operations officer at Buds, there is not much to do, meaning you have phases of this program that have been going on for decades. You have a senior enlisted guy, you have an officer, and you have an incredible cadre that know what they're doing. So I had some time to think. And for the first time, I wasn't going to be taking guys downrange. So I felt like I could think and I could ask some questions about, hey, what am I going to do next? And how am I going to support my family, particularly our son with special needs? And so I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to write. So about, I'd say, year and a half before I got out is when I started writing. But I had done all the preparation throughout my entire life, through all the reading that I had been doing in the genre my entire life. And I wasn't doing it because I was thinking, oh, one day I'm going to be an author. So I'm going to figure out how that I need to read these books. It was more enjoying these books, the magic in those pages. And so it's a really different perspective. And I'm really glad that I got to read those books, let's say the Tom Clancy's and the David Morrells and the Nelson Bills in the 80s, rather than, let's say, oh, I'm 40, I'm about to get out of the military, I want to be an author. What should I have been reading for these last 30 years? And I didn't have to do that because I had already done it. And I got to read them through the eyes of a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15, 16, 17, 18, continues on. But at those ages, there's not as many filters that are they're there now. So let's say if I sat down and thought, oh, I better read some of the classics. I better go back and read Hunt for Red October. Okay, and now I'm whatever age, and I'm going back to read this book from the early '80s, and now I'm trying to put myself in that position. It's just a different way of reading a book, and I got to enjoy it with all that magic when it came out in the time frame, in the height of the Cold War. So I really feel like I had probably prepared myself as well as one possibly could, both for the SEAL teams and for what I'm doing now. But it was all very genuine and real. It wasn't like it was all in a way that I couldn't have done it better, I guess. Which is it sounds strange to say that, but doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. And you can't be an author if you just decide to be one. You certainly can, but having built that foundation ahead of time certainly helped me because I didn't have to go back. Even in sixth grade, we read Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell, which is a short story written in 1924. They still teach it in some schools today. But back then in sixth grade, I told myself that one day I'd write a novel that paid tribute to that short story. And that's my third novel, Savage Son. So from a very early age, I knew what I was going to do. That helped significantly. Then the year and a half before I got out, when you're, and for those listening, when you're in the military and you drop your papers and tell them you're getting out, you go in a different pile, and that means that you have to now go to dental and to medical and get read out of secret programs and turn in gear and do transition assistance programs and get signed off on all this paperwork, which takes time. And being in the military, you have to stand in line to make your appointments to do all these things. So I had time, and I had time to start writing, and I went in that different pile. So I started writing back then. So by the time I got out, the book was essentially done. I was in the editing phase, and then sent it to Simon and Schuster in November of 2016. And my editor and publisher today, Emily Bessler at Simon and Schuster, Emily Bessler Books, she asked me to come out to New York. Flew out to New York. I think she wanted to make sure I wasn't a crazy person, and especially after what she just read. And had a great coffee together, and she wanted to buy it. So off we went to the races.
And now are your books, are they like fiction loosely based on fact? Like tell us a little bit about the books.
Well, I thought they were going to be entirely fiction when I started. And I knew that I would get the sniper weapon stuff right, and I wouldn't make mistakes like on different weapon systems. And if I didn't know exactly how an Apache helicopter worked or didn't exactly know what it was like to fly in an F-16, I could reach out to people that had done those things, and then I could interview them and weave those things into the story. But what was evident, and this wasn't clear from when I came up with the title, when I did my one-page executive summary, when I did my outline, and that's pretty much how I've done every book thus far. Still wasn't clear exactly how personal of a writing experience this was going to be. And then when I started turning that outline into the narrative, first sentence, I realized exactly how personal this was going to be. So what I weave into the stories really is the feelings and emotions behind things that I experienced downrange. So not necessarily exactly what happened, but if my character in this totally fictional made up story gets ambushed on the streets of LA, I go back and remember what it was like to get ambushed in Baghdad in 2006. And I take those feelings and emotions and I apply them to a completely fictional narrative. So even though the story is all made up, the feelings and emotions that the protagonist is feeling, those come from a real place. And I think that's why it feels so authentic and real, and why the character and the series has resonated with me.
So far you've written, is it 7 books? Is that correct?
7 books, and then my first nonfiction work comes out here September 24th, and that's on the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing. So I'd like to weave a lot of history into my novels. All that reading that I did growing up wasn't just fiction; it was on the nonfiction side too. Just kept reading nonfiction I could find on warfare, military, special operations. Was reading all that my entire life. So I weave a lot of history into the pages of the novels as well. And I knew that at some point I'd want to write nonfiction. And so after I think it was after the fifth book. Anyway, I talked to Simon and Schuster and said I had this idea for a nonfiction series on different terrorist events, and I want to do a deep dive into these different terrorist events that really influenced our foreign policy and that have lessons that we can apply going forward as wisdom. So I want to capture those. So the first one is the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing, and that's coming out here September 24th.
Very cool. We'll make sure we, towards the end of the show, which we're probably like 10 minutes away, we'll make sure we give the audience all the info so they can get a hold of that. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. you've written 7 books. You got that first nonfiction one coming out. I know like every book's like a kid. You probably love them all, but you got a favorite out of the bunch?
I do. And it's interesting in that it is always the latest one. Um, and moving aside from targeted, which is the nonfiction, so that aside, because it's the first one, and it's so different in the nonfiction space and my first foray into that space. But when I look at all the novels, the 7 thrillers, everyone, and my goal is to always get better because people are trusting me with time that they're never going to get back. So when I'm writing the books, I'm not thinking about, oh, what's going to be popular, or I don't want to alienate a certain part of the audience, or, oh, how do I grab something from the headlines, or are short chapters better than long chapters now? Don't think any of that. It is all about the story because I'm so thankful to people who allow me to do this, who allow me to do what I love, which is write. And in order to honor them and the time that they're never going to get back that they're spending either in these pages or listening, it has to all be about the story. It has to be the best story it possibly can be, and it has to be better than the last one. So my goal is always improve, just like anything in life. I want to be a better operator today than I was yesterday. I want to be a better author today than I was yesterday. Same thing. And so up to this point, anyway, latest book has always been my best, or my favorite anyway. So Red Sky Mourning is my latest thriller, and that came out in June, and that's certainly my favorite thus far.
So your first book, The Terminal List, I just pulled it up on Amazon. So that one has the most number of reviews, and obviously it's become now a blockbuster show on Prime. Tell us a little bit about that. Obviously, you have a TV show that is, or sorry, a book that's been made into a TV show series. How did that come to be?
Yeah, so crazy. As I was writing, being a child of the 80s, it was very natural for me to think about an actor right away, writing my first sentence. Don't know anybody in Hollywood, don't know anybody in publishing. And as I sit down to write, I'm like, who should play this character? And at the time, Zero Dark 30 had just come out. So I got to see Chris Pratt in Zero Dark 30, and I'd seen him in Parks and Rec before. So I got to see this transformation, physical, and then got to see the acting ability as well. And I thought, oh, Chris, because I'm like, this is me. Once again, I have no connections anywhere, and I'm on my first sentence. And I thought, oh, this would be good for Chris Pratt's career. He can show people that he can do a character like this. He hasn't done one yet, and I wanted someone who hadn't done anything like this yet. And then I'm like, well, I picked my actor. Let me pick my director. Oh, Antoine Fuqua would be amazing. He did Shooter, which is based on Point of Impact by Stephen Hunter, which is an amazing book. And love Antoine Fuqua's work. So I'm like, Antoine will direct. And then I get back to writing. And now fast forward 3 years, 4 years. Anyway, regardless, 2017 November, before the book comes out, I get a call from a buddy of mine in the SEAL teams, Jared Shaw, and he says, hey, I hadn't talked to him in 5 years, and he says, hey, do you remember me? And I said, yes, of course I remember you. How's it going? And he said, do you remember what you did for me in the SEAL teams? And I said, nope. He said, well, you're the only person that when I told you I was getting out, when I told people I was going to get out of the military, you're the only person that sat me down, talked to me about transitioning to the private sector. You introduced me to people, and then you followed up with me and asked how it was going and if you could do anything else. And no one else did that. And I've always wanted to say thank you. And I said, yeah, no problem. How's it going? And he said, it's going great, but I heard you have a book coming out. I said, yeah, it comes out in a few months here, and I can send you a galley copy, which is like an early copy if you want to check it out. And he said, I'd like that, but I'd like to give it to a friend of mine. And I said, yeah, no problem. Who's that? And he said, Chris Pratt. And I was like, oh, that's very convenient because I pictured Chris Pratt playing this role. So I sent it to Jared. He read it to make sure it wasn't garbage. And then he gave it to Chris. And actually, I have a picture of Chris reading it for the first time. And then Chris called a week later and wanted to option it. So I said yes.
Wow, man. You have like, I'm going to say this, and I don't know if this has been said to you before, but like, it seems like you're pretty good at manifesting the outcomes that you want. Like, do you think of things like that, or has anyone ever said that to you before?
People say that to me, yeah, quite often. But I don't think about it in those terms. I don't sit here thinking like, okay, I'm going to imagine this happening and then that'll help it happen. No, it's all about work and just doing the job and trying to improve and always trying to make something better and always learn. I'm always a student, no matter what I'm doing. I was a student of warfare in the SEAL teams. Now I'm a student as an author, both of history and of the genre, always trying to make things a little better, even if it's just by a degree. So yeah, I don't think I manifest. I just grind.
I love that, man. I'm being a grinder as well. I appreciate that you just said that. What what do you like? What's next for you, man? Like, obviously, you've created a lot of these cool things. You're writing a bunch of cool books. You have a blockbuster TV show with Chris Pratt, which is amazing. But I love the fact that the grind is what's getting you there. What are you grinding for? Like, what's the big thing you're grinding for next?
Yeah, we're still working on the spin-off TV show called Dark Wolf with Taylor Kitsch, prequel origin story for his character, for those who have seen the Terminal List. So I got to write on that, executive produce that, and then we start filming in 2025 at some point. True Believer with Chris Pratt, which is the second novel. I have a few other Hollywood projects at various stages, so nothing really to announce there yet. Just once again, the grind. But it's amazing to have those opportunities, whether anything comes of them or not. And then I'm super excited about the fiction, the nonfiction here, and diving back into the next novel. So got to write the next one to come out next spring, and it's just go go go. So all sorts of projects, and I just feel extremely fortunate, and try to get on social media as much as I can to thank people, because now you can. Back in the day, the only time an author could thank somebody was at a book signing. And so I love doing that, love getting on the road. There's book tour for the Targeted Beirut book. Love going on book tour, shaking hands, thanking people, but also try to, as much as I possibly can, get on the social channels and hit that heart button and say thank you to people, because I'm so sincerely grateful that people trust me enough to spend their time with me.
I love that, man, and appreciate where you're coming from. There's a lot of humility there. So look, you got the new book coming out September 24th. What I'm going to do is I don't know if this was in purpose or accident for us to do the show right now. I'm going to make sure that we align this to your book launch so that you get some promotion right when I know but by the way, listeners don't know this, but when you launch book, like, it's really important to get a lot of promotion the week of the book launch. That's how you make the list, which helps get it out there more. So we'll make sure. Do you want us to put it out before the 24th, the week of the 24th? What's your preference?
Right, week of the 24th is always the best, I think, but whenever it works for you. I just appreciate you having me on.
We'll do it the week of the 24th. So yeah, tell the audience, where can they get the new books? Where can they get the old books? Where can they see everything on all things Jack Carr that you want to promote?
Yeah, probably the hub is officialjackcar.com. That's the website. You can link to the social channels from there. That's those are Jack Carr USA. But you can just link from the website. And there's the podcast, Danger Close. That's all on the website as well, and a little information about me. There's some merch. There's a bunch of things like that. So officialjackcar.com would be the place to start, probably.
And so for listeners, it's Carr with 2 R's, in case you're not familiar with Jack and his work. So it's officialjackcarr.com. We'll make sure that we put that in the show notes. But if you're listening and you're driving around, it's pretty easy to remember. And make sure you go out there and support the book launch, because that's what makes it all happen, is supporting our authors when they have book launches. Now we're going to be going to the greatness question, so you got to hang back. I want to finish plugging where to hook up with Jack and his work, and then we'll make sure as well, Jack, we'll put your social in the show notes as well, so people can connect with you there if that works for you. Does that sound good, my friend?
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, you ready for the greatness question?
Sure. Let's see. Let's do it.
All right. What is the number one barrier to creating greatness that you've overcome in your life, and how did you overcome it?
Geez, you give me the whole time to think about this too. But I don't really think about things in those terms. I just think of things in terms of opportunities, and think about things in terms of what's been sacrificed before, what other people have done before. So I've never thought of like something as, oh, how hard something's going to be, or what are the chances. Never. I think people think of the odds. How would I say that? Because people like to tell you that there are the odds of becoming a New York Times bestselling author, the odds of making it through Buzz, the odds of creating a business or whatever, how many businesses fail, how many restaurants fail, whatever that is. People like to talk about that and tell you about that if you let them know that you're starting a business, or starting a restaurant, or want to write a book, or want to go in the military and be in special operations, whatever it is. So I just never even consider that. I just never consider the odds. So I think that's important. Somebody made it. Somebody's on that list. Somebody started a restaurant. Somebody created a business. You can too.
I love that, my friend. It's funny. I have a perspective, and I think you've just kind of touched on it, which is, if one person can do it, then I can probably do it, right? And it's like there's no limitation. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to go and become.
You got to do it better, because you got to learn from what that person did, and then figure out how to do it in your own time. Because if there's somebody that you're looking at that did something 30 years ago, or 20 years, even 10 years ago, it's a different battle space today. And so you not only have to look at what they did and draw those lessons, but you need to look at the current battle space and look at those things same way that I looked at the battlefield, how to adapt to the changing environment, how to capitalize on momentum, and how to look for gaps in the enemy's defenses in whatever space that you're in order to do it better. And that's kind of how I want to move the genre forward with every book that I write, even if it's just by that degree, like I talked about. So that's but it's all out there, and we're very fortunate to be in a country that affords us these opportunities. And I always think about those people that sacrifice so much for us to be here today. So can't thank them enough, and can't be any more grateful about them all the time. And I see my phone is ringing here because it's my next interview.
All right. Well, listen, Jack, my friend, appreciate you so much for coming on the show. Everybody go out there, support the book launch, support Jack, support the show. And until next time, peace out, everybody. We love you. You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on, so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers, and after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.